Welcome to Social Personality Unit 5. In this unit, we'll be talking about social withdrawal. Now, social withdrawal is something we have to define right from the outset. And that's because when we commonly think about someone who is withdrawing from the social group, we often think about someone who is alone or someone who's experiencing solitude. Now, solitude in and of itself may exist for many different reasons. One of the lead researchers in this area of social withdrawal is Ken Rubin, a Canadian-born developmental psychologist. And Rubin's work has really illustrated how just having someone withdrawing from the peer group can be due to many different motivations and many different reasons. One example would be introversion. We know that introverts tend to get energized through spending time alone and in solitude, as compared to extroverts who may get energized by spending time in groups. An introvert may enjoy spending time alone because they're content being alone. It helps them to feel calm. It helps them to be able to focus. This is very different from something known as anxious solitude. This is the idea that someone is alone and they're not necessarily happy being alone. They're anxious while they're alone. Often anxious solitude is the idea that someone is alone, but they're very upset that they're alone and they want something to change in their lives so that maybe they have people in their life. Maybe they have friends or family or someone else in their life. So that would look very different from introversion. Then we have, of course, social anxiety. This could be someone who is alone and they don't desire other people to be around, but they're not calm necessarily like an introvert. They may be quite panicked at even the thought of spending time with other people. In comparison, an introvert might be okay spending time with other people. They're just more comfortable being alone. Then we have other words that are often used in this area of research, such as behavioral inhibition. This is the idea that at a biological level, an individual may feel more inhibited and more aroused during novel and social interactions. And then we have words like reticence. And this is the idea that a person may not necessarily be alone, but when they're with the peer group, they are more passive and they speak less and they're more quiet. They're not the leaders and they tend to just go with the flow. So they don't really stand out in a group. So there's all kinds of different components here that could all be social withdrawal. It gets a bit murky. And so to understand this, we really have to look at the differences between our motivations. So in terms of motivations, Jens Affendorf started to look at the different motivations of wanting to approach and spend time with others and the motivation to wanting to avoid negative evaluations and negative criticism received by others. And so he considered these two different motivations, the approach motivation and the avoidance motivation. And he noted that using this, you could draw a matrix showing there's three groups of people who may experience social withdrawal, but for very different reasons. We'll start off with the one group that wouldn't be considered to be socially withdrawn, and that would be the group that's considered to be high in approach and low in avoidance. That is, they have a high desire to spend time with other people, and they don't feel the desire to need to avoid people because they're wary or afraid of negative evaluations. In that situation, we'd be talking about someone who would be considered quite social. They might be extroverted. They might spend a lot of their time with other individuals. Then we might have someone who is considered to be low in approach motivation and low in avoidance motivation. This would probably be the content introvert. They're not looking to hang out with other people, but they're also not worried about other people either. So this is a person who's going to be completely content reading a book on their own, spending their weekends at home. But if they happen to interact with other people, it's no big deal for them. And so this terminology in the social withdrawal literature is sometimes called introvert, but more often either called socially disinterested or unsociability. Then we have the individuals who are considered to be low in approach motivation and high in avoidance motivation. These individuals do not desire being around people, and even when they're not around people, they are often very afraid and contemplating and preoccupied with thoughts of negative evaluations. So these may be the people that go on to experience social anxiety, and we may consider these people to be quite avoidant of others. They might be spending Friday and Saturday night home alone, but they may not actually be relaxed about that. They may be premeditating about what's going to happen when they see people down the road and in the future. And the last group we're going to talk about are those individuals that are high in both approach and in avoidance motivation. And what happens here is they desire being around others, but they're also very preoccupied mentally with what others are going to think about them and if they're making a good impression on others. And these are people that are going to experience what we call the approach avoidance conflict. They want to have a social life, but the thought of social situations makes them feel quite panicked. And so these are the individuals that developmental psychologists have labeled as shy. And for the purposes of this unit, this is how we'll be defining shyness. It is someone who's experiencing a high approach and a high avoidance motivation. And so through looking at these motivations, we can identify 3 subtypes of social withdrawal. It becomes important to pay attention to these motivations. Now, luckily, even if you don't know a child's motivations, you can still tap into and predict which subtype of social withdrawal they may be experiencing. Now, because social withdrawal can be made up of these 3 different subgroups, which are all tied to 3 different motivations, it's important for us to distinguish between them. Luckily, researchers have identified ways that we can identify the socially disinterested, the avoidant, and the shy children. One of these ways is by looking at playground behavior. That is, if researchers go and they are able to observe the behaviors of kids on a playground, either before or after a pandemic, when children are able to move freely at their own desire and be in groups or be alone as they want, this can help us to identify the motivations kids have. For instance, we know that on the playground, the kids that are very high in approach and low in social avoidance, those social kids, they're going to spend time with other kids. Maybe not 100% of their time in the playground, but a lot of their time in the playground and more time than the other kids for sure. They may spend time with just one other kid, so they're in a dyad, or many different kids. In comparison, the kids that spend time on their own, well, we know they're either going to be the socially disinterested, the shy, or the avoidant kids. But what makes them look different? We have to look a little bit more detail on what they're doing on the playground. For instance, the children that are experiencing social disinterest or unsociability, they tend to spend time in the playground alone, but they're doing something really fun for them. They might be playing on the swings by themselves or shooting a basketball by themselves. They might be drawing on chalk on the pavement if the weather's nice and warm, or they might be making a snowman by themselves or a snow angel by themselves if the weather's cold. They might be reading a book or doing something a little bit less active, or maybe something really active like running laps by themselves. The point is they might be doing something that they really enjoy. And so the children with that low approach and low avoidance motivation that are happy being alone, you're going to see that. We tend to see them do something constructive and something worthwhile doing on the playground. In comparison, the children that are low in approach and high avoidance, we might see them being visibly upset on the playground. They might seem especially timid or especially nervous, or maybe they resist going to the playground entirely. But one of the most interesting type of children to see on the playground are the children that are alone but experiencing that approach avoidant conflict. And so these are the shy children that want to be with others but don't know how to approach them. And for instance, we tend to see this really fascinating phenomenon known as the hovering effect. And this is when a shy child, because they're not content being alone, they are hovering in close proximity to a group of children, and they're kind of hanging back. They want to initiate and introduce themselves to the group, but they are wary that the group is going to negatively evaluate them or tell them to get lost, so they hesitate. So it's quite common to see this group of children kind of talking, and then you see this kind of hoverer who's unsure about how to approach the others. And that would be the child we would consider to be shy. There's other ways we can differentiate between the disinterested, the avoidant, and the shy children, of course. Try and ask teachers and parents and peers about the kids' behaviors and what they seem like. But we've really determined that looking at kids' self-preference matters a lot. And a lot of the work by Dr. Rob Copeland has really emphasized this piece. And so one of the measures is the preference for solitary play measure that kids, even at elementary age, are able to answer. And even though they might be in grade 1 or grade 2, we can often administer an oral or verbal version of this test. And this allows them to identify, are they happy playing alone? Are they happy playing with others? When they're alone, what are the types of things they like to do? And this helps us to tease apart what's going on there. That being said, social withdrawal is a very big area, and social withdrawal can be very heterogeneous. There could be lots of diversity in why someone might be more quiet or more withdrawn from their peers.